At first glance, Canada often appears familiar to Americans. The language sounds the same, the cities look orderly and modern, and daily life seems built on recognizable routines. Yet beneath this surface familiarity lies a subtle cultural dissonance that surprises many Americans almost immediately. The difference is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, restrained, and woven into the rhythm of everyday interactions. Canada does not announce its distinctiveness. It reveals it slowly, through tone, pace, and unspoken expectations. Early impressions are shaped by an atmosphere that feels calmer, almost softened. Public spaces tend to move at a gentler tempo. Voices are slightly lower, gestures less expansive, reactions more measured. Americans often notice that conversations carry fewer sharp edges, with disagreements smoothed over rather than sharpened. Even in crowded urban centers, there is a sense of emotional distance that feels intentional rather than cold. The environment encourages composure, signaling that restraint is a form of respect. This difference becomes clearer through small, repeated moments. Apologies appear frequently, even when no fault is obvious. Politeness operates not as decoration, but as social infrastructure. Many Americans observe that directness, which is often valued back home, can feel intrusive here. Opinions are phrased carefully, requests are softened, and personal space, both physical and emotional, is carefully guarded. The culture seems to prioritize harmony over clarity, and consensus over confrontation. Social behavior reflects deeper values rooted in collective comfort rather than individual assertion. There is less emphasis on standing out and more on fitting in without friction. Achievement exists, but it is rarely displayed openly. Confidence is understated, sometimes almost invisible. Americans accustomed to self-promotion as a neutral or positive trait may find this absence unsettling at first, as if something is being intentionally left unsaid. Daily life reinforces this mindset. Rules are followed not out of fear of punishment, but from a shared understanding that systems work best when everyone cooperates quietly. Lineups move efficiently, public transport operates with minimal drama, and casual encounters are governed by mutual courtesy rather than spontaneous friendliness. It is not unfriendly, but it is reserved, and that reservation carries meaning. Over time, these patterns begin to form a coherent picture. Canada presents itself not through bold statements, but through consistent emotional moderation. For Americans, the surprise lies in realizing that similarity can be deceptive, and that the most profound cultural differences often speak in the softest voice. This reserved emotional climate extends into relationships and social bonding. Americans often notice that friendliness in Canada unfolds more slowly, following an unspoken process of trust building that resists acceleration. Casual warmth exists, but intimacy is earned gradually. Invitations are rare and meaningful, not impulsive. Social circles tend to remain stable over long periods, and entry into them is subtle rather than ceremonial. This can feel puzzling to Americans accustomed to quick rapport and expressive enthusiasm as signals of openness. Workplace culture mirrors these dynamics. Hierarchies exist but are flattened in tone, with authority expressed through competence rather than assertive presence. Meetings are quieter, interruptions are minimal, and consensus is quietly negotiated rather than forcefully argued. Americans may sense that ambition is present but carefully disguised, wrapped in humility and collective language. Success is acknowledged indirectly, often credited to teams rather than individuals, reinforcing the idea that visibility should never eclipse balance. Communication styles further deepen the contrast. What is not said often matters as much as what is spoken. Indirect language acts as a social buffer, preventing friction before it can form. Americans, trained to value clarity and decisiveness, may initially misread this subtlety as uncertainty or emotional distance. Over time, however, patterns emerge, revealing a culture that values emotional safety over expressive transparency. Public life reinforces this restraint. Political conversations are quieter, personal beliefs are guarded, and emotional extremes are generally avoided in shared spaces. There is an unspoken agreement to keep private intensity private. For Americans used to open debate and visible conviction, this can feel like a constant lowering of volume, as if the entire society operates one notch below full expression. Even humor reflects this cultural calibration. Wit is dry, self-deprecating, and carefully timed. Loud confidence rarely carries social reward. Instead, understatement becomes a form of intelligence, and emotional control signals maturity. Americans may sense that standing out emotionally attracts discomfort rather than admiration, encouraging adaptation through observation rather than imitation. Gradually, these experiences accumulate into acquired cultural education. Canada does not challenge Americans through conflict, but through contrast. It reshapes expectations by demonstrating that stability can be maintained without intensity, and that social cohesion can be built through restraint rather than performance over months. These patterns begin to influence behavior and perception in subtle but pervasive ways. Many Americans find that their own habits, once unconsciously loud or overtly expressive, are tempered when living in Canada. Daily choices, from conversation pacing to commuting patience, begin to align with the quieter rhythms around them. The emphasis on courtesy, indirect communication, and emotional moderation encourages reflective posture, one that values observation over immediate action, and careful listening over rapid response. In this environment, impulsivity is gradually replaced by measured consideration. Neighborhood interactions reveal another layer of cultural shaping. Neighbors greet each other politely, yet maintain distance, sharing information when necessary but rarely intruding. Children play with freedom but under watchful, unobtrusive supervision. Public spaces are orderly without overt policing, reflecting an underlying trust in communal responsibility. For Americans accustomed to either highly expressive communities or visibly enforced order, the balance between personal autonomy and collective respect can feel both unfamiliar and unexpectedly comforting. Canadian holidays, local traditions, and everyday customs reinforce these norms. Celebrations tend to be low-key, with attention paid to inclusion and subtle gestures rather than grandiose display. Even consumer experiences, like dining out or shopping, carry a predictable calm. Service is polite without performative friendliness. Efficiency is quietly prioritized, and small acknowledgements, like a sincere thank you or careful attention to detail, feel laden with meaning. Over time, the understated patterns of behavior, the consistent predictability, and the avoidance of overt emotional turbulence collectively form a cultural rhythm that Americans begin to internalize. Often without consciously noting the adaptation, these social patterns also shape broader perspectives. The emphasis on collective well-being, mutual respect, and emotional regulation encourages a worldview in which societal stability is more valued than individual exhibition. The quiet attention to fairness, even in small daily transactions, reinforces an implicit sense of equality. Americans living in Canada often notice a shift in their expectations. Patience, empathy, and subtle negotiation become tools for navigating life, rather than blunt assertion or competitive advantage. Ultimately, the Canadian approach to life cultivates a form of psychological space that feels simultaneously restrained and secure. For Americans, this can be disorienting at first, but over time it reveals a landscape of calm intentionality. The societal signals modulated speech, careful politeness, indirect communication act as a kind of cultural music, setting a tempo that reshapes behavior and perception. What initially seems different or puzzling slowly becomes coherent, revealing a society that achieves cohesion through subtlety rather than spectacle. Reflecting on this, it becomes evident that the shock Americans feel is not merely about customs or manners, but about the deeper structuring of social life. Canada demonstrates how a society can balance individual freedom with collective responsibility, emotional expression with restraint, and familiarity with difference. The surprise lies in recognizing that a culture can feel both recognizably North American and quietly, profoundly distinct. A lesson in noticing the soft architecture of everyday life, where harmony is cultivated as a constant, pervasive presence rather than a momentary gesture.